What if a place existed where a scream couldn't echo? Not because no one cared, but because the walls were designed to swallow it. What if silence itself became a weapon? Sharpened, rehearsed, perfected. For decades it was just a whisper, a cursed word passed between trembling mouths. Sednaya, a prison carved into the mountain north of Damascus, buried beneath layers of denial and fear. No images, no names, just the lingering sense that something unspeakable was happening behind those steel gates. Now imagine this. You're walking down a corridor where thousands vanished, where the air still tastes like rust and memory, where walls were painted not to clean, but to conceal. Would you keep walking, or would you run? Because on December 8th, 2024, those gates finally opened. Not for justice, but for cameras. And what they revealed wasn't just a prison, it was a machine of erasure. Watchtowers stare down like frozen sentinels. Trenches surround the perimeter, not to keep people out, but to convince anyone inside that escape is suicide. The cells are small, identical, the doors thick, the light rationed. But the worst part isn't what you see, it's what you feel. That you're standing inside something that was never meant to be seen. A place where the floor still remembers the weight of those who never left. Sednaya wasn't built for punishment. It was built for disappearance. Not to correct behavior, but to crush identity. Not to sentence, but to erase. This isn't a prison story. It's a story about what power does when no one's looking, and what happens when we finally dare to look. So now I ask you, how much silence are you willing to carry once you know what it's hiding? It doesn't look like a slaughterhouse. Not at first, just concrete, steel, repetition. A geometry so precise it feels sterile. But walk further, and you start to feel it, like the building itself is holding its breath. Sednaya was designed to be invisible, not to the eye, to the world. Buried into the hillside, isolated from any population, it sits like a scar that no one wants to admit is bleeding. Walls upon walls, gate after gate, guard towers arranged like chess pieces in a game you've already lost. And then, silence. A silence so thick it pushes back against your thoughts. Inside, the layout makes no sense, deliberately. Corridors twist, choke, narrow. Time stretches, light fades. The farther in you go, the more you lose your sense of direction, of space, of self. This isn't bad design, it's strategy. A psychological maze meant to disorient, to dominate, to dissolve identity. Cells are cold, identical. No windows, no mirrors, no clocks. Only the sound of metal doors, boots on concrete, and breath, shallow, hesitant, terrified. Every hallway reminds you there's no one coming. Not your lawyer, not your family, not even your God. And the smell. Antiseptic layered over mold, sweat, and fear. It doesn't leave your clothes or your memory. This place doesn't scream. It hums with absence. Absence of light, of justice, of mercy. Sednaya doesn't just imprison bodies, it suffocates presence. It makes you doubt you were ever real to begin with. If that image hits something in you, leave this in the comments. Even silence has a weight, because sometimes the loudest cruelty is the one that hides behind walls designed to look ordinary. They called them rooms, but they weren't rooms. They were voids. Spaces built not for living, but for forgetting. Deep beneath the surface of Sednaya, below the visible floors and past doors with no handles, exists a hidden layer. A floor that doesn't appear on official maps. A floor that doesn't echo, because even sound is crushed down here. These are the solitary cells. Some carved so deep into the earth, they feel like they were designed by someone who hated light. No sunlight, no horizon, no sense of time, only walls. Damp, cracked, close, too close. Here, no one calls your name. Because your name doesn't matter. What matters is your number. Scratched into concrete, sewn into a rag, whispered between coughs in the dark. You become your suffering, its rhythm, its breath. And when footsteps approach, you stop breathing, not from fear, but from instinct. Because in Sednaya, footsteps are punctuation marks at the end of someone else's sentence. Some were brought here already broken, others were broken here. And a few, the rare few who survived and dared to speak, still carry these corridors in their eyes. In these rooms, there are no witnesses, no records, only dust, silence, and stain. And when a man disappears into this level, he doesn't just vanish from society. He vanishes from memory, from lineage, from language. It's not execution, it's erasure. If that thought unsettled you, write this in the comments. Names matter, silence destroys. Because remembering a name can be a form of resistance. There's no official list, no monument, no final count engraved in stone. Just a number that echoes quietly through destroyed homes and dinner tables set for the dead. 250,000. That's how many were swallowed by the prison system under Assad's regime. And Sednaya, the crown jewel of silence, was at the center of it. They didn't die in combat. They didn't die on the streets. They were taken, without trial, without charges, without goodbye. A knock on the door, a black hood, and then nothing. No record, no body, just absence, heavy, deliberate, suffocating. Mothers searched morgues for decades. Fathers begged for information from men in uniforms who responded only with blank stares. And children grew up learning a word no child should ever have to carry: disappeared. And for those who ask for evidence, walk through the dormitories, count the layers of rusted gates, touch the walls where names were scratched by fingernails long before being forgotten. This wasn't a prison with cells. It was a machine, engineered to convert human lives into void. Some were activists, some were students, some just prayed in the wrong mosque. But once inside, innocence was irrelevant. There were no judges, only fists, no defense, only punishment, no justice, only obedience or death. And the message sent to the living was clear: to survive, forget. To speak, disappear. If that reality cut deep, leave this in the comments. Some absences never fade, because naming what was erased is how we make sure it can't be buried again. From the outside, it looks like a fortress. But from within, it feels like a body with no lungs. Air circulates, but it never refreshes. Light exists, but only enough to remind you that you're still awake. Everything in Sednaya was designed to say one thing: no one is coming for you. The corridors aren't just narrow. They twist deliberately, like veins constricting around fear. Some lead nowhere, others loop back on themselves. There are doors that open into nothing, staircases that descend into dread. The ceilings are low, the walls are thick, and time is fluid. It stretches, contracts, forgets itself. Without clocks, without calendars, the body stops trusting the mind. This is not an accident. This is architecture as psychological warfare. The guard towers don't just enforce security. They enforce submission. Like eyes that never blink, always watching, never listening. The outer walls are layered with trenches and razor wire, not to stop intruders, but to mock the idea of escape. The isolation is so complete, it becomes intimate. You don't just feel alone. You begin to believe you were never connected to the outside world in the first place. And inside, each cell whispers the same quiet message. You don't exist. No windows, no names, no reflection of self. The smell of sweat mixed with antiseptic becomes your new identity, the echo of distant metal, your lullaby. Sednaya doesn't use violence as punishment. It uses absence of dignity, of witness, of worth. And when a system builds, forgetting into its very foundation. Even survival can feel like betrayal. If that image struck a nerve, leave this in the comments. Control has many forms. Because when bricks become accomplices, silence becomes law. They say it was just a rumor, a whispered myth passed between trembling inmates and broken guards. But those who stood near the door, they don't call it a myth. They call it by name. The human press. Hidden deep within Sednaya, in a room that never appeared on any official diagram, sat a structure made of rusted steel. No plaque, no number, no instructions, just stillness, cold, mechanical, final. They say it wasn't used often because it didn't need to be. Once was enough. To send a message so loud it never needed to be spoken. Men brought here were not interrogated. They weren't questioned. They were already deemed unredeemable, traitors, heretics, rebels of the soul. And what happened next didn't require an audience, only obedience. Witnesses say the room didn't echo. That even the metal refused to remember. But those nearby, they heard. Not the machine. The silence that followed. The human press isn't about how it works. It's about what it means. That in this place, disappearance wasn't enough. Some had to be erased so violently. Even the rumor of them became a warning. The regime denies its existence. Of course it does. But the families who never received bodies, they know. The guards who retired early, they know. The silence itself knows. Because in Sednaya, cruelty doesn't always scream. Sometimes it waits, still, ready. Like rusted steel behind a door no one should ever open. If that image chilled you, write this in the comments. Some rooms were never meant to exist. Because naming the unspeakable is the only way to stop it from happening again. While screams echoed in the dark halls of Sednaya, something else moved, silently, strategically, beyond its walls. Not hope, not justice, but profit. Because while one hand punished, the other profited. Syria didn't just build prisons. It built an empire, not of ideology, but of chemicals. And its crown jewel was Captagon. They call it the poor man's cocaine. But on the streets it goes by other names, whispered by those too wired to sleep, too hollow to care. It's not just a drug, it's a weapon with a barcode. And where does it come from? From factories hidden behind fruit warehouses, from containers marked as humanitarian aid, from inside potato crates, voltage regulators, even granite countertops. Places that should offer nourishment, energy, shelter, turned into vessels of addiction. Satellite images confirm it. Border seizures prove it. But the true proof lives in the silence. The regime doesn't fight the drug. It sponsors it. And while the men in Sednaya were being tortured for whispering the wrong prayer, the same regime was quietly moving billions of dollars in narcotics across the region. At the heart of it all, Maher al-Assad, brother of the president, architect of repression, and now, the cartel king of the Middle East. He doesn't wear gold chains, he wears epaulettes. He doesn't need back alleys. He has military checkpoints. Captagon isn't a street drug. It's a state strategy. Cheap to make, easy to hide, impossible to trace, perfect for fueling proxy wars and numbing restless populations. So while Sednaya suffocated the body, Captagon seduced the mind. One breaks you, the other makes you forget you're broken. If this truth made something shift in you. Write in the comments. This wasn't about healing. It was about control. Because in regimes like this, even suffering has a business model. The real number isn't printed on any wall. It isn't spoken in speeches. It doesn't appear in court documents or annual reports. But it echoes through rooms that were once shared, through doors that were never knocked on again, through the breath a mother holds every night, still waiting. Over 250,000 people vanished into the void of Syria's prison system. And Sednaya wasn't just one of the worst. It was the blueprint. No charges, no trials, just a van, a hood. A silence that began at the doorstep and never ended. Families searched for years, some still do. They bring photos to burned-out buildings, ask strangers to describe tattoos, scars, accents, hoping that somewhere in the ashes, a trace survived. And the state? It offered sermons. It offered propaganda. It offered peace without proof. There are children who never met their fathers, wives who sleep next to a folded shirt, sons who inherit not land, but questions. Why did they take him? Where did he go? Is he still alive? Would I recognize his face? This is not just disappearance, it's a rupture, a violence that continues every day in every unanswered prayer. Because when a regime doesn't need trials to imprison, it doesn't need graves to bury, just dirt, just concrete, just a camera turned off. And when that happens long enough, pain becomes private, grief becomes inconvenient, and memory becomes dangerous. If you felt the weight of that silence, leave this in the comments. Some absences never fade. Because some truths don't ask to be remembered, they demand it. They say memory fades with time. But not here, not behind these walls. Because Sednaya, once a place where names were erased, is now being reframed as a place of remembrance. A museum, a monument to what happened, to those who never came home, to pain too vast to name. At least, that's the idea. You walk through corridors freshly painted, cell doors propped open, tour routes mapped out with arrows and plaques, donation boxes at the exit. They say it's for education, for awareness, for never again. But bricks don't forget. Steel doesn't heal. And Sednaya's ghosts do not follow museum hours. Can a place built to erase ever become a place of remembrance? Can a room where men were crushed ever be curated without crushing the truth? Survivors still wake up sweating. Families still wait for answers. And here we are, placing display cases where chains once hung. It feels noble. It sounds good. But something feels wrong. Because history, when polished, becomes easier to look at, easier to swallow, easier to forget. And maybe that's the final cruelty, that even horror, once packaged just right, can become palatable, safe. Sednaya doesn't need a plaque, it needs a pause, a breath long enough to remember that what happened here wasn't just systematic, it was intentional, it was strategic, and it was never meant to be forgiven. If that unsettled you, write this in the comments. Some walls should never be silent. Because silence isn't always peace, sometimes it's permission. If you stayed with me through all of this, then maybe you already understand. This wasn't just about a prison, or even about Syria. It was about how systems turn pain into structure, how silence becomes policy, how forgetting is designed. Sednaya isn't just a place, it's a warning of what happens when brutality is normalized, when bureaucracy becomes a mask for violence, when the world looks away, and regimes learn that crushing a man doesn't require noise, only time and darkness. If something in this story stirred something in you, a breath held, a chill down your spine, or even just a lingering unease you can't quite explain, say something. even if it's just one word. Drop this in the comments. Pain should never be a currency, because when we speak, we reclaim space. We chip away at the silence. We prove that someone is listening. Hit the like button, not for numbers, but because every time we amplify voices drowned by power, we light a small flame in the dark. And if this kind of truth, raw, difficult, necessary, is something you believe should keep going, then subscribing isn't a gesture. It's a form of resistance, quiet, collective, ongoing. This channel isn't about shock. It's about memory. It's about presence. And it's about building something that outlives the fear. There's a video right here. Another silence, another truth, another system wrapped in barbed wire. Click it. I'll be waiting there.